All right, I am back. Um, if you've gotten this far, and I commend you. You're quite you must either love me and really want to hear this stuff, or you're really interested in it. So where we leave off, where we left off there was I'm reading out of Faith versus Belief, a piece of treatise called Faith versus Belief that I wrote many years back. It's kind of a, so to speak, it's an epistle treatise, as a form of letter. Anyway, this is the second half of this. I just got a little bit more to close it up and finish it up, and this should be the thunder, as I say. So here it is, part two, faith versus belief. There is something in astrology known as the precession of the equinoxes. Okay, most occultists know this. This is, common information. I won't get into the technical aspect of explaining it, other than it has to do with an approximately 2150-year age or aeon, so to speak, aeon, which is ruled by one of the zodiacal signs. Jesus, or Joshua, so to speak, because Jesus essentially is Yeshua, right? So Jesus or Joshua, because it's essentially the same name. Jesus is just a transliteration of the Aramaic name Yeshua, okay? And so I put Jesus slash Joshua was essentially the solar avatar slash teacher developed by Gnostic Hellenized Jews as a literary persona to usher in the transition from the age of Aries to the age of Pisces. This is the meaning behind all of the Lamb of God references, along with the Fisher of Men title, and the miracles having to do with, quote, fish. Now that we are approaching the end of the age of Pisces, the sun has shifted in its, quote unquote, course over the eons and now currently also passes through the stars of Ophiuchus. Another important point to make is that most individuals think that when the Gospels refer to the last days, quote, they are speaking of the end of this world or Armageddon, when in fact they are expressing the last days of the Piscean age. Okay? So when Jesus tells Judas he, quote, will become the 13th, he is speaking prophetically and astrologically of the future, when Judas slash Ophiuchus is transformed to the holy, quote, generation, the quote, holy generation, or kingdom of heaven. In other words, becoming a portent of the next more spiritual, or sometimes called Sethian. Seth was the third son of Adam and Eve, and was there's a whole bunch of mythical things, and a whole bunch of things that are attached to this stuff, and Kabbalah and all this, and this being the third son, he is supposed to be the fulfillment, and the through him comes basically the line of Jesus, because Jesus is the son of Adam, and then so sometimes the son of Seth, or the sometimes this is called the Sethian generation. There was even a group of Gnostics back in the the first few centuries called the Sethians. Another one called the Ophites, the Valentinians. I mean, these were all groups. This is different Gnostic Christian groups. So we call it the Sethian generation, which will, quote, rule over them the other, quote, 12, who are of the older or other generation. The irony of all this is that most modern astrologers do not acknowledge Ophiuchus as an actual sun sign. and is in this sense cursed by the other generations. Um, Jesus, being the Son, knows that Judas Ophiuchus will be part of the future generation, a serpent bearer, wisdom bearer, or light bearer, like unto him. Judas also does not does, excuse me. Judas also does what no other disciple could willingly do. He betrays his friend out of love and understanding of what must be accomplished. Now, this really confuses a lot of Christians because they're all like, well, if Judas didn't betray Jesus, well, there wouldn't have been sacrificing. And a lot of them will sit there and go, yeah, you're right. I kind of think about that. But really, Judas gets the black hat. Judas is the bad guy. But in the Gospel of Judas, he's the good guy. He's the good guy now. And you're realizing this. You're realizing that he's not the bad guy. That Jesus sees that he's special. And he's selected for this special thing. That because it's showing that he will one day come and be part of the future generation that will kind of be that will rule over the other 12. And this is referring to a sign in the zodiac or in the wheel that's there, that it actually is a very spiritual sign. It's a sign of almost like prophetic, vision. Not to get into Ophiuchus and all the meanings of all that, because that goes down a whole rabbit hole. But it's a sign of like the fulfillment of it's the light bearer sign, the serpent bearer. Okay, and he is the one who is the fulfillment. He's like the higher transcendent vibration or transcendent energy of Scorpio. So it's like Scorpio is kind of its own energy all of its own, but Ophiuchus is like kind of almost like, and a lot of astrologers will say, don't think of it this way, don't think of it just as a higher, like a higher energy or whatever, or a more loftier, more energy of Scorpio. But they say don't do that, but don't think of it that way. But it is this kind of transformation. It's a shift of Scorpio between Scorpio and Sagittarius, and it's extremely mysterious. And the ancient Christians, and I'm sure people even before them, they seen this. They knew of this 13th kind of sign, even though it wasn't really a sign. It wasn't really part of the zodiac. But they knew it was majorly a role. It played a huge role. Just for a side note, not to, and this is one reason I am very interested in this stuff, because when I looked up some of these things and saw where, so to speak, the little gap, the 2-week gap that it would take if you were born, where would you have to be born to be in that sign, so to speak. And I still think I'm a Sagittarius. I was born in Sagittarius stars, but I was born also in that transitional phase on the 1st of December, to where it's through that Ophiuchus is there. And so it's not saying that, okay, well, you're a different sign. It's just saying that energy is definitely there as well as your solar, Sag energy. And the Sag influences, the Sag Sagittarius, aspects are all there, solar energy. So, I mean, like, it's hard to explain this stuff. It gets really, cold and really weird and deep. But there's definitely something to all this stuff. And the ancients knew this. So, to not digress too much, I will say, finish this, to make this video hopefully not too long. So, what I'm saying here is that the irony of all this is that most astrologers do not acknowledge, of Ophiuchus as an actual sun sign, and is in this sense kind of, cursed by the other generations. which, this is just my kind of interpretation of this. There's probably a little more of a deeper, probably meaning than just what I kind of, surfacely was like, hey, this is kind of how I kind of took it. So, don't take it and run with that. It's like, that's the only way I've intended for this to be meant. I'm still looking into these mysteries myself. So, Ophiuchus is an actual sun sign. So assuming I'm saying it's kind of like it's cursed. Jesus, being the son, knows that Judas, Ophiuchus, will be part of the future generation. A serpent bearer, wisdom bearer, light bearer, like unto him. Judas also does what, okay, and I already read this, what no other disciple could willingly do. He betrays his friend out of love and understanding of what must be accomplished. This is, of course, the sacrifice of Christ upon the cross, which must be fulfilled in order for mankind to receive, through Christ's example, the knowledge of salvation. So basically what I'm saying is, through the mythos and through the vehicle of the mythos, through the sacrifice mythos, to understand what that means, and Christ's sacrifice upon the cross as being the Son of Man, the everyman, the Son of Adam, who is sacrificed to redeem mankind. It's extremely profound. And it's not, if you try to take this stuff and just pigeonhole it into the first century and make it like it's some sort of event, you will fail to find the true spiritual meaning of this stuff. And it might be troubling. Maybe, because everybody's been said, we all believe it a certain way. And we all just assume that all this stuff is like, well, there's got to be a guy, there's got to be a story, there's got to be a real thing here. There's got to be something tangible. And I'm telling you, basically, no. No, it's as much as you want to love Jesus or whatever, it's not tangible. And even if you, like I've said in other videos, even if you want a guy in the first century to be there, it still begs the question. You're not looking at, the only God that was ever God. And, these are meant to be understood. It's not to say that these things aren't true on a certain mystical level, that Jesus is the fulfillment of the prophecy of David and all these things. That is true. But it's true in a different kind of way. You can't just run to the cleaners with this stuff and then say, well, this is for the entire world. Well, yeah, it's for the whole world in a certain way, but, in a way that it rings on the anvil of truth, and there's wisdom and there's beauty to the doctrine of trying to understand, because there again, like I'll say, these are just a bunch of ideas based upon man's observation of nature. And so, yes, we see ourselves in nature, and we see the beauty of God in humanity. And we see that God has sacrificed himself, essentially, in order to be in humanity. And that's the suffering. God suffers. God, on the cross. We are God. We are suffering. We suffer. But through Christ, through salvation, through realizing the truth that we are still not separate from God, then we don't suffer. Pain is something you feel in the physical body, but suffering is in the mind. Suffering's in the soul. So if you know Christ, so to speak, is what Christians are saying, then you don't suffer. So you don't die. You don't know death. And when you come to die, you won't experience death like a person that it won't come to you as a fearful and terrible thing. It'll be like, you'll just, you'll just naturally, you won't fight it. It's because you understand you're not separate from it. So it's these are all things that, there's no magic that happens. Salvation is not from some magical event other than the event that happens within your own self and soul and your awakeness and awareness of these things, that you say, well, okay, yeah, I have faith that there's a, in the greater mystery, and my belief through, is based on something else, is a whole nother thing. and they work together, but you gotta want to confuse them. Your faith is something that should be kept intact. You should never, you can learn that, Jesus wasn't a real guy and all this, it's all just a myth, and that wouldn't destroy your faith. You see what I'm saying? That's my point, is that by jerking the rug out, if that's your faith, if that's your belief, if your belief system is the rug, or that, becomes, what I'm trying to say is if you pull something away from somebody and say, okay, now, due to better information, now you kind of need to believe this a certain way, surely you're crazy. You know what I mean? Well, and you're like, well, if your faith is based upon those things, well, then you're screwed. You're like, oh my God, I just lost my God. I lost God. I'm I feel like I'm a wayfaring lamb. So now, but if you have faith in a way that's like so much deeper and so much more profound and absolute than that, and something that is an intuitive feeling, then it can't be touched. You can say all kinds of things about history and about really what the facts are and all this stuff, and you just be like, well, yeah, you still have faith that it's, you know what I mean? That's the difference. So, I will finish this really quickly, and it says, like I said, this is, of course, the sacrifice of Christ upon the cross, which is the example, the knowledge of salvation. So, in other words, only through Judas was the divine plan fulfilled. And only Judas, being now the 13th, knows the true secrets of the kingdom that the other 12 cannot foresee. This is why he was willing to sacrifice himself by hanging himself from the tree. A lot of these things are in quotations. Quote, the tree, and releasing his identity with the idol or image, like Christ did upon the cross or tree of life. Many Kabbalists look at the cross itself as kind of a, type of symbol of the tree of life. Okay. This is not a profane suicide of shame, but rather a spiritual act of honor and higher vision that Jesus imparted to Judas and not the others. This is not to be taken as a condoning of suicide, but rather meant to be interpreted mystically and spiritually, not logically. Okay? There is another sublime symbolism here that relates with the mystery of the tarot, or rather the mystery of the tarot relates with it. The 12th trump card in the tarot is named the Hanged Man, and its formula is that of sacrifice. It's the man hanging upside down and, telling him about tarot. And he's, often hanging upside down on a tree. There's different, there's different pictures of it. So I'm referring to the Hanged Man in the tarot. And its formula is that of sacrifice. This is Judas as one of the 12. The next card is Trump 13, Death. And this card is ruled by Scorpio. The very meaning of this card lies in the concept of a transformation from the lower to the higher, the scorpion to the serpent. And this is representative of Judas as Ophiuchus, or light bearer of the Sethian generation of the future. So some may, I make a little comment here. I said, have I gone too far? I'm kind of posing this question, to people like, you think I've gone too far here, folks? Some may say I have, but I assure you I have not, I say. In fact, there is so much layered symbolism and metaphor to these things that one could go on for quite some time without ever actually revealing or explaining all that there is to be, quote, seen and, quote, heard. And a lot of people know this about the Gospels. It says in the Gospels, there's lines at the very toward the beginning. It says this, these words are basically, or are for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. Well, this is an occult allusion. They're alluding to something, basically saying that you need to read this with different lens. Don't read it literally. That's what that's saying. And people always just think, oh, well, I got some eyes, I got ears. Well, it's just saying, it's like saying just, perk up and listen and perk up and look. It's not what it's saying. It's saying for those who have eyes to see, squeegee the third eye, as Bill Hicks says, spiritual eyes and ears, spiritual ears to hear the word of God and know what it really means, and not try to profane and carnalize it and literalize it into some sort of, where's the upper room? Was that Martha's house or was that Peter's house? If it was important, if it was going to mean something spiritually, it would have been in the Gospels probably, or it would have been, in some gospel somewhere. You would have, these things. Every time you see something mentioned, anytime someone's name is mentioned, it's meaningful. It's not just like they didn't call Joseph and say he's a carpenter for no reason, because, and I could go down another video about this, because it's because Joseph, as the carpenter and the earthly father of Jesus, represents the demiurge, the carpenter, the maker, the material, the god of the material world. And this gets into a lot of Platonism and stuff like this, and the dualism, and that's why a lot of Christians don't like Gnosticism, because there is a sense of dualism, like kind of like Zoroastrianism, and they see this as a heresy of their doctrine, because to them there's only one God. But Kabbalah rectifies this and reconciles this as showing you that the demiurge is just really another aspect of the monad, of God, as one God. But it's just kind of this involution that is necessary, this kind of like this kind of push against, as they say, the path of least resistance. But there has to be some resistance there for something to evolve. And the demiurge is kind of like that resistance. And the demiurge is also kind of this kind of, you might say, manifestation of God's power, so to speak, that is responsible for just the innate matter of the universe, is kind of how the doctrine goes, but is not, Sophia put the spark, the spirit, the matter, which is really her, there's a lot of different ways to go down this. Sometimes it's another sun, sometimes it's another aeon that she pulls from the, from the pleroma, the whole, which is, it gets really kind of weird and chin deep in some weird theological and cosmological stuff, but which I could go into another time. But I'm just saying that this stuff is all connected together, and it's most people just don't understand it. Because even if there aren't Christians and they're not people who are like dead set on, say, being Orthodox, I talk to a lot of people that say, oh yeah, my mom talked about Mary Magdalene, or my mom talked about this. Oh, she said, yeah, that the church had it all wrong. They lied about her, and she wasn't a prostitute. She wasn't. Well, I'm going to tell you as a Gnostic, yeah, she was a prostitute, in a kind of, in a mystical, mythical way. She is the harlot. She is the sacred harlot. This stuff is misunderstood. So it's in the early church, in the Catholic Church, whatever, not the original primitive church, but the Catholic Church, they marginalized all this. They scraped it off. That's why Nicodemus was taken out. That's why all these things were taken out, because, and they couldn't include them all. They had to just, because it didn't link up with their, their version of basically trying to, kind of literalize the story and make it a little bit more like, hey, folks, because that way it made it more convincible to, convincing when you're trying. I mean, in my opinion, that's kind of why they did it. It's, I even have all kinds of theories about what Rome's real intention, and why that maybe this was something that was kind of in the works for a long time, to try to create this kind of apostate church, or this kind of Roman, or this kind of official more institutionalized church and kind of crystallize the doctrines into this kind of literalized and carnalized kind of interpretation, and say, hey folks, this is it, it happened, and this is it, there's God, you all need to convert and accept this, or look, because if I tell you that this actually happened for real this time, and this is the real deal, Holyfield, then maybe you will, and I think that some of this stuff, I could go into some stuff and really go deep into this, but it goes back to the Judean-Roman War, which I am reading Josephus and studying some of that stuff right now, but it gets into some really chin deep stuff, and basically political motives to create things, no different than the CIA used, unions in Florida, union fronts to kind of front their, anti-Castro stuff, and back in the '60s and stuff. I mean, these are real things. So, but it's political. It's they're using these things as a means of leverage and political leverage, and doing something that they, to accomplishing their agenda. And so that's why religion has become institutionalized, and essentially the Gnostic philosophies and things have become profaned, because it would point to the fact that, well, we didn't really need a big bishop, and we don't need all these intermediators, really. We don't need the church per se, and that's kind of what the Protestants were saying, but that's what the Protestants were saying, actually. It's exactly what the Protestants were saying. And they kind of had it right. Thank goodness they, in some ways they kind of did, free us from the Catholic Church in that way, Martin Luther and all that. But it really just opened up more questions and kind of made, it made a bigger mess before we were able to clean it up. So it's really what the Protestant thing did. It's not that it wasn't necessary, but it did create probably a bigger mess, before we are now maybe are starting to kind of clean it up. And this is my effort right now of trying to clean it up. And whatever pebble in the ocean this makes. I'm just being led in the Spirit and doing my thing. So I will finish this by saying, to put it simply and concisely, the 12 disciples all believe in Jesus, but Judas Iscariot, being the 13th, has true faith in the Christ. This is the difference. Most people believe in Jesus and do not have faith in the Christ Spirit, for their faith is based upon their belief in a supposedly historical man, not the Spirit. I will skip this next sentence. I do kind of mention something about it kind of being related to Arianism, which is really referring to a 3rd century CE theologian, Arius, which was kind of why the Nicene Creed was made, and there was a lot of division between Arianism and the Orthodox view, even back in the 4th century and stuff. So anyway, I do write that it is a type of kind of Arianism, and that fetishizes the life of a mortal man. And I did say, in the Gnostic view, the true heresy and gross insult to the divine. I wrote this a long time ago, so take that as you wish. I mean, I was very passionate. So I will skip that sentence. I'm not, of course, like I said, I'm not talking about Arianism like white supremacy at all. That's Arianism with a Y. This is Arianism with a I. It could be very easily confused with what, and misunderstood. So, anyway, I'm referring to a particular theologian, and that many barbaric tribes and a lot of people who took on Christianity later on took up this kind of view of Arian, this type of Christianity that kind of looked at little Jesus more as kind of a mortal person and not so much this, anyway, it gets into some splitting of hairs of doctrine and shit. Anyway, I hope you can appreciate my point of view and see that what I'm saying is not just a bunch of nonsense. I also would be honored, and I'm just basically writing to him. He writes me back. So I'm going to skip over some of this stuff. Then I end with the Gospel of Thomas, verse saying 2, which basically just says, let him who seeks continue seeking until he finds. When he finds, he will become troubled. When he becomes troubled, he will be astonished, and he will rule over the all. And it goes on to say, you must seek in order to discover the Spirit and truth, and must continue seeking until you realize the Spirit indwelling you. and know the truth in your own experience. It is not enough that another person has discovered the truth. Each individual must seek and strive to discover it, and so engage in the divine labor of salvation of one's soul, the awakening and liberation of one's soul in conscious union with God. And I will end that there. This is actually a half-hour long video, so I don't even know if I will post this, but So, in the spirit of Sophia, thank you so much. I'm signing off from the Wizard's Den.